suspect most of us are aware of the Me Too movement. That movement, everybody know about it? Yeah? Okay. That movement began in 2006 when an African-American woman began to fight back against the abuses of power she and her African-American friends had endured. The movement gained the national spotlight when Ashley Judd made public the abuses of power she had experienced from Harvey Weinstein, the producer, the movie mogul. Well, at that, the floodgates opened, and other women and men came forward to share the harm that they had experienced at the hands of power. From there, women and men in almost every industry spoke up, saying that they too had been harmed by people in positions of power. We know about the misuses of power in the church, in politics, in the restaurant business, and well, just about everywhere. The powerful have had the opportunity to misuse their power since time began. Bathsheba could have been an early member of the Me Too movement. Bathsheba was the wife of Uriah, a soldier in King David's army. Now, David had sent his army out to do battle against the Ammonite army, and this time, instead of going with his army, David decided to stay home in Jerusalem. Now, shortly after her husband left with the army, Bathsheba was innocently taking a ritual bath so that she could be ritually clean again. And the first listeners would have known that the bath meant Bathsheba was not expecting a baby with her husband Uriah. Ritual baths were hidden in the courtyards of people's homes so that the bather, male or female, had the assumption of privacy. Public nudity was forbidden in ancient Israel, so privacy during ritual baths was really important, and Bathsheba had every reason to believe that her bath was private. She had no idea that David was standing up on the roof of the castle, gazing down into the courtyard. Well, and when it came to David peeking and everything that came later, according to Scripture, Bathsheba was completely innocent. Well, David couldn't stop thinking about her, so he sent for her the next day. And as a woman in ancient Israel, Bathsheba had no choice but to do whatever the king requested. She had no right to refuse the king anything he demanded. Consequently, David satisfied her desire and sent Bathsheba back home. And all was well until Bathsheba sent word to David that she was with child. And at that, the wheels came off for David. He had misused his power, he had victimized a married woman, and by the laws found in Deuteronomy, Bathsheba's husband Uriah could have demanded that David and Bathsheba both be killed for their actions. And if Uriah knew the truth about all of this, he could have had David removed from the throne or worse, and David knew all of that. So David decided to manipulate events so that the child would appear to belong to Uriah. And if that didn't work, if he couldn't figure out how to get Uriah to somehow be able to be known as a father, well, then Uriah would have to die. Now, ultimately, Uriah maintained the purity pledge that he took before he went off to battle. When Hebrew men went to war during ancient Israel, they pledged holiness to God so that their fight would be blessed by God. In other words, they stayed away from physical intimacy of all kinds. Therefore, no one was going to believe that this child belonged to Uriah. And David came to the conclusion that he had no other choice but for to arrange for Uriah to be killed in battle. You see, the more David misused his power, the more he dug a hole for himself. And the more he misused his power, the more he had to turn to violence to solve the problem. The more David misused his power, the more people were hurt. Bathsheba, Uriah, and we'll learn next week, ultimately the baby all suffered because David chose to misuse his power. And when power failed to cover things up, David turned to violence. Now, it's not hard to look at David's transgressions along with Harvey Weinstein and a whole lot of others like it and see the problem. Someone with more power than someone else chose to use their power to satisfy their desires while the other less powerful person was harmed. Everybody catch that sentence? It's a little convoluted. Okay. So when accused, the one doing the harm tried to use their power to cover up the problem, and when that didn't work, threats, warnings, ultimately violence were used to cover up the misuse of power. And that pattern has been used by the powerful throughout the ages. Those with power find ways when they choose to victimize those with less power. And when the people who were harmed spoke up, threats, lies, violence were used to keep the ones with less power quiet. Now, pointing a finger at someone like King David is kind of easy. Pointing fingers is so much easier than looking in the mirror to recognize all the ways that we use the power we have at our disposal to manipulate or misuse others. King David was truly not aware of the power that he had. I suspect he thought he was just being the king, no problem. Well, and I suspect most of us are not aware of how much power we have at our disposal and how often we use it without even thinking about it. In fact, I suspect most of us don't feel powerful at all. We look at what we don't have rather than what we do have. We don't recognize how extremely blessed we are in comparison to others in our community, our state, our nation, and our world. We look at what we don't have. After all, we live in Mantiwoc County, which is not a wealthy area in the state. And we see all of those huge boats, all of those huge trucks, all of those beautiful new SUVs, all of those gorgeous RVs heading north to Door County. And we think, wow, I got nothing in comparison to that. And then we see all those license plates from Illinois speeding by. See, I grew up in tourist country, and the assumption at that time was we were being invaded by rich people from Chicago. And we didn't like that feeling at all. We look at what we don't have. We look at the beautiful homes on the lake. We see people going out to eat or buying groceries that we know we cannot afford, or wearing clothes that we know we cannot afford. And it's easy to see ourselves as having very little power in comparison to those who seem to have so very much. But like David, too often we don't realize just how much power we have. In our world today, money is power. And we're pretty, thank you. And we're pretty, I like the amens, I like the encouragement. And we convince ourselves that we just don't have very much. That we don't have much financial power, and the way that we use our financial power, it's a drop in the bucket. What can we do? Well, if we look around, we might notice that we have infinitely more power than those who live at the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Center. We might notice that we have infinitely more power than those who live at Hope House or the Haven. And we forget that local merchants depend on the power that we have when we make purchases to make their lives better or worse. Most of us have a lot of power to help or harm others. If we have a roof over our head, if we have something to eat every day, if we have more than one set of clothing, if we have more than one closet, if we have a car to drive, if we have clean water to drink, we yield more financial power in the world than 99% of the people, other people who live in the world. Friends, in the world, we are the 1%. We have incredible financial power to help or to harm others. And if we live with those things that we simply consider to be just the basics of life, we fail to realize how very powerful we are and how much influence we have when we use our spending and our giving power. Most of us are incredibly blessed with the power to help or harm others in the way that we handle our money. And like everybody with me so far, anybody want to argue? It's okay if you do, I don't mind. Okay, like David, the only way to prevent misusing our power is by recognizing how much of it we have to benefit or harm people's lives. And whether we accept this as a truth or not, the fact is we have tremendous power to do good or to do harm to others. David had power and he totally misused it. We have power, and in fact, we're extremely powerful people, and we have the power to choose whether to help or to harm others. And the easiest way to begin checking our power is by looking at the labels on the things that we purchase. Easiest way. Take time to look at the labels on whatever we purchase and to ask ourselves if we're supporting a company that cares for its workers and the environment, or are we supporting a company that pays little and harms the environment? Are we making decisions that help others, or are we using our power to harm others? It's a small step, but it takes time, and it takes commitment, and it takes energy, and it takes willingness to accept that we have the power to make a difference in how other people live. And friends, I'm preaching to myself more than any of you, I'm sure. Because let's face it, clicking Amazon is so blessedly easy. I'm not sure Jeff Bezos needs more money. Whereas our local merchants, I suspect, do. I'm preaching myself as much as anybody else. But how we use our power determines how we are seen by God and how we are seen by others, just not now, but also in the future. We can claim the power that we have, and we have a lot, to help people, or we can pretend that we don't have any power at all and risk harming others. David and other powerful people have made huge mistakes. We can learn from them, and we can do better. Amen.